Up next on Inside Vintage Racing, building back after the big one. Welcome to episode 2 of Inside Vintage Racing. I am Brian Bielanski, and I am getting ready for episode number 2, brand new podcast here on the Racing Network. We started last week with Ben Cool, and now we've got another Formula 4 driver with us this week, but they are not going to be all Formula 4 drivers, I promise you folks. We will get to some other very, very cool stuff here on Inside Vintage Racing, but nonetheless, we have our guest this week is Kim Madrid. Kim, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. And so we've got you on the show for a couple of reasons. One, because you've got a really cool race car. And you go all over the country racing it, which is pretty awesome. And I follow you on the Facebook and your trials and tribulations. But also, we're going to talk about having to build your car back after a big wreck. That's all.
That's not the fun part of racing.
It is not. But it's interesting on the vintage side of racing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it. But before we get to that, I start every episode with the same question. And that is, how did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we love?
I actually started this sport many, many years ago. I actually started racing motorcycles. Ended up getting hurt. I broke both ankles, and that's when I decided that I needed 4 wheels at that point.
What kind of motorcycles were you racing?
I had a GPZ 550.
Okay, so that was street bikes.
Yes.
Okay. I used to do some corner working for motorcycles until I had too many wrecks at my corner and a couple of fatalities at my corner over the years. And the final straw for me was when the guy fell off his bike, clearly had broken a leg and maybe an arm, and he just wanted to get back on the bike. And I'm like,
I was going to say he was trying to probably get back on the bike.
I'm like, you are absolutely, completely batty crazy. And I was like, you know what? There's plenty of cars for me to flag for. It's just isn't my cup of tea. But I have mad respect for motorcycle racers because it takes a special kind of person to do that.
Yes.
So what did you
That was pre-kid, though. That was pre-kid racing.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. When you transitioned to cars, what did you transition into?
My first race car that I drove, I actually shared a second-gen Mazda RX-7. Okay. And I started racing with Alfa Romeo Club back in the day. And that's where I actually got my license and then started running with TCRA, Touring Car Club of America. Okay. And then kind of went back and forth between those two cars. And then eventually got into open wheel cars in 2004. Okay. So the transition to cars, about when was that? I started racing cars in 1997. Okay, cool. And then that was production cars, then went to open wheel in 2004. Got it. Yeah, that second gen RX-7 was a ton of fun, wasn't it? Oh, it was a blast. I loved driving that car. The only thing is I just kind of started getting cocky and thought I needed to start racing open wheel because you have to be much more cautious in open wheel, touching other cars or anything like that. I like to tell people that it's not more cautious, it's more precise. Exactly. You have to really make sure you hit your marks, you know where you're at. You have to be a little more aware of the cars around you because sometimes they're not always aware of the cars around them. Yes. It's I agree with you. A lot more intense. I did some Formula V racing. And that's what I started in, Formula V. Okay. Which Formula V did you start in? So I had 5, but kind of went up the rank. I started with an RCA. Okay. And then that thing was just like a cement tank driving around. It was just, oh my God, it was the hardest car I ever drove. And then I went to a Zinc. Okay. And then I went to Caldwell. Right. those were all vintage. And then I decided to run a few years of SCCA with a Laser.
Yep.
And then a Mysterian.
Oh, so you've come up through the whole Formula V family pretty much.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, my V was a Caldwell D13. So.
Oh, the best. That is the best. I will still say the best vintage Formula V out there. Well, it's the Caldwell D13.
It was the only one I could fit into.
Wow. And it's also the best handling V.
Yeah,
very forgiving.
It was a dream to drive.
Yes, it was.
I put a rod through the case, and that was the end of that for me. I moved into IT cars after that, but I had an absolute blast, and I'm actually thinking about trying to get back into doing either Formula V or Formula F or Formula Ford, as you guys call it at Vintage Racing.
Yeah.
So we talked about it last week with Ben. It's called Formula Ford in Vintage Racing. In the SCCA world, we call it Formula F because there's a Honda motor that we can use in club racing. None of that, though, in vintage racing, right?
No, Hondas are not allowed to run in vintage classes.
And I'm guessing that's mostly because any car that's running a Honda really wouldn't be considered vintage, right?
Well, it wouldn't be considered a Ford.
Right.
And also you have to run on treaded tires in vintage racing also.
Right. And
the Hondas all are designed, the newer ones, the Pipers and everything else, the Swifts, are all designed to run on slicks.
Sure. Yeah, I'm guessing, though, it's someday down the road, another 20 years or so, they'll be old enough and they'll rework the rules, or they'll make a class for Formula F because, people want to keep driving the cars.
Exactly. So. Well, just like now in the vintage world, most of the vintage class clubs allow the Swift to run as long as they run on treaded tires,
right?
Which Swift is only 20 years old at this point, and they still sometimes struggle to get in with some vintage groups.
Sure. What's the general age limit in vintage? Is it 30 years? Is there a general rule?
1972 is the true cutoff for vintage.
Okay.
So there's actually three different classes in Formula Ford in vintage. There's true vintage Formula Ford, which is 72 and older.
Okay.
Then there's Club Ford, which is 73 to 78.
Okay.
And then anything newer than 78 is considered modern Ford.
Okay. And what do you drive now?
I drive a Club Ford, which is a Crosley 32.
Got it. So what, and you've been doing the Formula Ford since about when?
Late 2011, I started Formula Ford.
Going on 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up on 15 years. What makes you keep coming back to the Formula Fords?
The people.
Yeah.
The race community and the Formula Ford group is the best people out there. I mean, because the parts are interchangeable on a lot of the cars, we all help each other if there's issues at the track, because a lot of us all work on our own cars, and if we need a clutch or we need, some type of suspension part or something, most of the cars are interchangeable, and you could change a lot of the parts.
Right. So, when I think vintage racing, and I think what a lot of people think vintage racing, they think, a bunch of old cars basically just circulating around a racetrack.
Heck no. That's not in the Formula Ford group.
That is not the case in Formula Ford. You guys get after it, right?
Yes. I know myself, I'm very competitive. There's no way I would be able to go out there and do parade laps to just look good out there. I'm very competitive, and I know that a lot of the people I race with are too, but we're also smart.
Right.
I'm not gonna wreck my car to if I know that someone isn't driving fair or correct or safe. I'm not gonna put myself in that predicament where I'm gonna get wrecked.
Right.
It's not worth it.
And people who drive that way tend to get weeded out pretty quickly, I think, in most cases.
Yeah, for the most part, yes.
Or if not weeded out, there are discussions with the stewards
and within the group.
Right.
Within the group.
and you know, maybe they have to have a little talking to, and then they kind of fall into line.
Right.
We was talking with my wife this morning, who doesn't really know much about vintage racing, and I tried to explain to her there's a little bit difference between what I consider vintage and historics, because historics often are cars that are fairly priceless. And those are often more of a parade, you know, get out there, drive them around, still drive them a little hard, but maybe not like you guys drive your Formula Fs. Whereas the Formula Ford, see, I did it again. But with the Formula Fords, you know, there are parts out there, they can be fabricated. You don't want to wreck your car, which we're going to get to in a minute. But if it does happen, you know, you can come back in most cases and put the car back together.
Well, that's why I drive a Crosley, number one, is because whenever I have an issue with Crosley parts, I could literally just call up Neil Porter from Porter Racing and say, hey, Neil, I need a front corner upper A-arm or, you know, whatever. The parts are readily available for a Crosley.
Right. Are they still being made, or does he just have a nice pile in the back of the shop?
No, most of them are still being made.
Okay, cool.
And if they aren't being made in England anymore, he has found a fabricator that can make them so that he could still sell them.
Right. So, you go all over.
Yes.
You know, you race. I've seen you this year. You were at Indy, and where was it? Mid Ohio.
This year we did Pittsburgh. Well, I did Laguna, and then ran at Willow Springs and Buttonwillow, and then I went to Pittsburgh, Indy, and Mid Ohio 3 weeks back to back.
That's got to be a fun trip.
Oh, that was a fun trip.
So, what? I'm guessing the allure of going to other racetracks, especially with the history of a place like Indy and Mid Ohio, and a lot of folks though don't make those long trips. What's the allure for you for making those trips?
Well, the allure for me is two things. I love driving at new tracks. Number one, I get bored going to the same track again and again and again and again. I'm just not. That doesn't interest me. I like to have to try to push myself to learn new tracks. And then the group of guys that I travel with, we travel together, caravan together in our motorhomes, towing our trailers, towing cars. Sometimes we tow other people's cars in our trailers also, and then they fly out and join us. And for me, what makes it really great is my husband retired this year, so now I'm not driving to these places by myself. My husband is actually with me now. So that makes it even nicer.
We're showing some pictures that you just sent me today. At least a couple of these were taken from Indy. I can see.
Yeah, those are Indy. Those are some from Indy and Pittsburgh, I think.
Okay.
Ones that I sent you.
And it just looks like a ton of fun.
Oh my God. Indy is just the fact to say that when you cross the bricks the first time or you drive your car through Gasoline Alley, I cried.
Yeah.
I cried my first time driving through Gasoline Alley.
How many times have you been to the Brickyard?
I have been to the Brickyard now 5 or 6 times. I think 6.
And I ask everyone this because I grew up in the Midwest. I'm a Chicago boy, grew up in Wisconsin. When I was a kid, there were no races at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway except for the Indy 500.
Yes,
there was no NASCAR. There was no SCCA runoffs. That's the runoffs have been in Indy. There was no vintage. It was just the Indy 500. And no matter how confident or brash I was, the idea of me going to race at Indy was pretty much never going to happen.
Yeah.
So, and I ask this to everybody who's driven there because this is on my bucket list. And when you go through the tunnel with a car behind you, knowing that you're about to take on what I think is the most storied motorsports facility in the world. What's going through your head? How's your heart beating?
It is amazing. It is just amazing. And you know what? Even the better part of driving the track is just I'm in the awe factor the whole time I'm there. And then, but to win at Indy, that's even bigger than big. Yeah. Because last year, a couple years ago, the 3 Californians, Bob Hatley, Todd Strong, and myself, took the podium first, second, and third.
Very cool.
And then last year, Jimmer Vasser was there racing with us. He has a Crosley just like mine, and we raced against each other. And Saturday he beat me, and I was second place right behind Jimmer Vasser. And Sunday I beat Jimmer Vasser. I was in heaven for a year.
Yep. Jimmer Vasser, of course, for those who might not know, former Ganassi IndyCar driver. Did he win the Indy 500?
I think he got second was his best. I'm not sure.
Yep.
I'm not sure about that.
Now he's the one of the owners of Vasser Sullivan Racing. They do mostly IMSA stuff at this point. Mm-hmm. And if you ever go to Napa, I believe Jimmer Vasser owns every car dealership in Napa.
He is the nicest guy in the world, though.
Yep.
Just down to earth and a racer just like me.
I have found that almost all of the pro guys and gals who come and do what we do are just doing it because they absolutely love to drive cars and they love the people, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, they just, so many of them, when I go to Indy, because a lot of the big names will run at that track that weekend that we're there. And I mean, you just go up and talk to them just like, you're just another racer talking to them.
Right. Very, very awesome. Very awesome. What, when you go back east and when you go race with other vintage racing groups, because is it SVRA at Indy?
Yes, at Indy it's SVRA.
Okay. And there's also HSR. I don't know if that's one of the groups that you've raced with.
I have not raced them, but I've run Road America quite a few times with BSCDA.
Right.
So
do all of the groups have essentially the same rules? So you can take your car without really having to do anything?
That's the good thing that we did with the vintage group is that the 3 classes exist at most of the vintage groups now, and it's all the same. Like we have to weigh the same. We use the same spec tire.
Right.
Most of the rules are the same with every club. So it's not like I have to make changes to my car to run with different organizations.
So how many cars did you have at Indy?
At Formula Indy, we had 42 Fords.
And that would be, is that a combination of?
Combination of the 3 groups.
Of the 3.
Yes.
So at SCCA, there are some weekends when we have 1, 2.
Yeah, it's sad, yeah.
What do you think, why do you think that is?
Well,
because
I don't know. Me personally, my personal opinion, that when they brought Honda in, I think that really hurt Formula Ford. Because if you look, what I personally think is if you look at the vintage groups that are all Formula Fords, no Hondas, they have grown so much. The average group when I go back east is usually 30 cars to 40 cars to 50 cars. And then here on the West Coast, when we run Avara, sometimes we have from 12 to 17 to 20 sometimes. But then you got the Crossflow group that's up in Northern California, and they have 60 Formula Fords. And they don't allow the modern Ford. That's only vintage and club Ford.
Right.
So the vintage groups have grown so much when SCCA added Honda or allowed Honda to run in the Formula now, which they call Formula F group.
Right. Interesting. Because I kind of figured that may have something to do with it as well. And I thought it was because the Hondas were more competitive than the Fords when they put the two together. But last year's Formula Ford national champion, Formula F national champion, was a regular old school Ford.
Yes.
And Nolan Allaire, he's a hell of a race car driver, by the way. But yeah, it was, so it's not necessarily fully just on the competition side of it.
No, it's not. That's what's great about the Formula Ford or Formula F class is that you can have $1 million and you could have $10,000 and you could still be a winner because it's the motors and classes a spec class. This class shows ability a lot more than your normal like GT classes or stuff like that would.
Right. So let's do a little transition here.
Okay. I know what's coming.
I was at Willow Springs, gosh, now I guess it would have been 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Almost. It'll be 2 years, I think, in November, maybe.
Correct.
October or November, somewhere in the fall. And
Yes.
I was doing the announcing for the Vintage Auto Racing Association, which is where we first ran into each other. And there was a Ford race, and I don't remember when in the race, but there was a pretty big wreck in turn one.
The first lap of turn
was
one.
it the first lap? Yeah, I've lost my mind. I've tried to maybe
the first lap of turn one. Lap one, turn one.
I guess you would remember, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And we don't need to talk about the circumstances because that's not really what I'm terribly interested in. Mm-hmm. But you got caught up in someone else's mess.
I had the worst damage, yes.
Yeah, you got caught up in someone else's mess, and you're pretty. And I'm going to put the pictures back up, by the way. You have one of the most beautiful race cars.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I love the pink. Is there a significance of 291?
I used to share a car with a guy I was dating before I got married, and he was 29.
Okay.
And then so we would slap a 1 on whenever I got in the car, 291.
I figured it was either 29 or 91 was the primary, and the 2 or the 1 got added on at the end.
Yep.
Got it. So you got caught up, lots of damage on your car.
Yes.
And when I saw it roll back in, I was just absolutely heartbroken for you.
Yeah,
and thankfully you were fine. I don't think you had anything serious.
I had a few bumps and bruises,
Right. And everybody was fine. There wasn't any serious injuries, thankfully. That's the most important part. But not long after, I started seeing some Facebook stuff that you were getting ready to put the car back together. And I followed you building it all back together. How much of the work? I know the frame had some tweaks and bends that I think you sent that out to someone to straighten all of that for you, right?
Yes, Neil Porter from Porter Racing straightened it. The frame had to be replaced from the main hoop all the way back.
Okay. I guess that's probably the easier half to replace, I'm thinking.
Yeah, but the front had a twist, so it had some twists that had to be fixed, but everything it's easiest to say that everything from the main hoop back was replaced.
Got it. And once the frame came back, did you do all of the wrenching to get it back together?
Yeah. Well, I had a friend helping me. Like I say, the guys that I travel with to go back east and racing a lot, we still, because at that point we still all lived in California. I do not live in California anymore, but we still all lived pretty close together in California. And so once I got the frame back, it was just, we were pressing to get ready to head to Indy. And so we had a month and a half to get that car back together, from nothing to a running car again.
Right.
And I sent the engine out to Ivy Engine, Ivy, and they got my engine done in time. And then so I had a fresh motor putting it back in when I put the motor back in. And then the good thing was that the body work didn't get too damaged from the crash. The frame did, but not the body work. We had to refiberglass a couple parts, but Todd helped me do some of the body work. And if you look at the body work now up close, you could actually see where some of the cracks were, because I still haven't redid the body work totally since then.
Right.
So this off season will be my body work repair year. But we started putting it back together and I started painting it. Because I didn't want to powder coat it, because it's a lot easier to find cracks on the frame if you don't have powder coat. So I just painted it and then put a really thick clear coat on the frame and started slamming it back together. It worked out great because I got COVID while I was doing it. So I got a couple of weeks off work and just told everybody I'm isolating out in the garage. Don't come out in the garage. And it gave me 2 full weeks to work on the car straight with no interruptions.
I did the 24 hours of Daytona iRacing sim race while I was in quarantine for COVID. So
It works out sometimes for the positive.
It just so happened that
we got the car got back together just in time to leave to Indy. The bad thing is that I didn't even get time to do any test days before we left on the car. So I literally went to Indianapolis when I had to race against Jimmer Vasser with no testing on the car. The first time I drove the car after that crash was at Indy test day.
So the third day of racing with that car was the day you beat Jimmer Vasser at Indy.
Yep.
That is a great story.
That was, that's why I just cried when I was up on the podium. My husband was crying. I had everybody crying up there.
Did everybody?
Because that's why I say the people of Formula Ford, because so many times, I can do a lot of the work myself. I work on my car myself. That's the only way I can afford to do this. But a lot of times I'm FaceTiming. Now that I live out of state, I FaceTime Todd or Bob or whoever, and I'm like, look, this is what the car's doing. What should I do now?
Right.
So I'm on FaceTime, and they're trying to tell me what I need to do to fix it.
Very cool. Was there ever any doubt that you were going to rebuild it?
Probably within like the first 2 weeks of the crash, when I still had the soreness and just like discouraged,
Right.
Because I know it's a Crosley and I know they're a dime a dozen type of Formula Ford, but to me, that's my baby. That car is everything to me.
Right.
My whole life revolves around racing that car. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's just, I kind of felt broke there for a couple weeks.
Yeah. It's hard to get back on the horse though, isn't it?
It is. When I started finally taking it apart, and seeing, okay, this can be fixed and this can be fixed, then I started getting a little bit more motivated and got it stripped down pretty quick and got it to the frame guy so that he could get started on it.
Right. So what does the future hold? I mean, is there a full slate of racing still left this year? What's on tap?
This year, at the point right now, I think, because we just moved out of state, so this year's kind of limited on my racing. Next year will be a full slate, but I do have 3 races still scheduled. I'm going to go run Button Willow with Vara, and I'm going to run at Spring Mountain with SVRA, and then probably the Big Bore Bash with Vara.
Sure.
We're still on the fence if we're going to go out to COTA this year.
Okay.
So we may do COTA, but we're still on the fence with that one.
So you've done something, and I just dawned on me to ask this question. You've done something that a lot of us gearheads absolutely dream of doing.
What?
You've built your own shop.
Oh my
from
God,
the ground up in the back of your house.
Yep.
And I mean, that is like gearhead nirvana. Tell us a little bit about that process.
It's 1,350 square feet, my shop.
Yeah.
I just got all the floors epoxied, and now we're starting to finally put my air compressor in, so I have air tools again, and I have a brand new big workbench that we bought. It's coming together finally. It's so, I just can't believe how nice it is to be able to actually walk around my car and work on it and not be crawling around on the ground on my knees all the time like I did in my little single car garage that I've been working on my cars, since 1997.
Yeah.
So it's a dream come true, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, wow. First Kim rebuilds the car and goes to Indy and beats Jimmer Vasser. And then I'm like, oh no, she's moving away. That made me sad because I figured you might not be out here racing with us quite so much, but you're still coming back to race, so that's awesome. There. And then I start seeing pictures of the house build, and the house is nice. It's a house.
Yeah.
And being a gearhead, and you said, and this is the best part. And you showed us just a plot of land, and this is where the shop is going to go. That was the first picture. There was no walls. There was nothing. This is where the shop is going to go. And I'm like, oh gosh. What? And then you showed us the step by step, and I'm like, can you adopt me so I can come and work in your shop? So awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome.
That's my dream come true. Once that's all done, then I'll post some pictures on Facebook with everything all done, and it's just it's amazing. I thank my husband every day for working so hard that we were able to get to do this.
Yeah. And now he gets to go with you and do all these adventures with you. That's a pretty good retirement.
Yes.
Are you retired now, or are you still working?
I am not. I am still working, but the fortunate thing is I'm still working in California, but I'm working remote. So I get to get up from my bedroom and walk to my office and get started working.
Yeah, I loved being remote during COVID because I had the best LA commute ever. It was like 16 feet.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
It was awesome. Awesome. So, all right. Well, this is the part of the show where we get to have you thank whoever your helpers are. If you have some sponsors, this is the time. The floor is yours.
No sponsors, unfortunately, but I have to thank my husband for allowing me to be me and do this racing forever. Because when we met, the first thing I said to him is, look, I have 2 kids and I race cars, so this is what you got to do.
Right.
So, and he was willing to do that. And my friends, Bob Hatley and Todd Strong, for always helping me out. And then our whole Formula Ford group, Todd Gerstenberger, Eric Inkrop, and I'm hoping I'm not missing everybody else, but our whole Formula Ford group down in Southern California.
Yep.
Love you guys all.
Good stuff. Kim, thank you so much for being with us, and good luck with everything, and keep us posted on all of the fun stuff that you do.
And I did bring this in, my signature mark right here.
Oh, yes. Yes, I don't know if you could see that in the pictures, but she's always got that mohawk on the top of the helmet.
That's what everybody knows me for.
It's so good. So good. All right, that is going to do it for another episode of Inside Vintage Racing. If you like what you heard and what you saw, subscribe to the Racing Wire Podcast Network so you won't miss any episodes, and the Racing Network on YouTube. Leave us a comment, especially if it's a good one. If it's a bad one, put it on someone else's page. You can also follow us on social media to find out who our next guest is and leave a question on Twitter. It's @RacingWireInfo. There's a new Inside Vintage Racing every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend and go play with cars.